Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good morning, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners here on the NBN. I'm here with my co-host, Kimon and our very special guest, James Hyde, who I must have known for like 10, 12, maybe even longer years now. And James is the former CEO and founder of James and James Fulfilment. And James, I could try to introduce you more than I have already, but why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners as you would to a total stranger who, for some extraordinary reason, hasn't heard of you already?
Okay. So I'll start, I think, with the quick backstory of the business, which is never as quick as I think, but it's probably worth saying for context. So I started the company with another James, which is why it's called James and James, and we were both kind of unemployed out of uni, looking for some work to do. We had some other projects which I won't go into, which didn't really come to very much, and we got some part-time jobs. Kind of minimum wage part-time jobs, just for some cash to pay the bills. And some of that was working for a honey company, doing office admin. So I was just sort of answering the phone, placing orders, doing some of the work. And they had a fulfillment company, which we struggled a bit with managing some of the inventories. You never quite knew how much was in stock. A lot of Excel reports being sent across every week. And it being quite hard just to get a handle on what was happening. We tried to move that to a better business, and we really struggled trying to find, this is back in 2010, we really struggled trying to find a company that was doing fulfillment for online, so that's the picking, packing and putting in the post of online kind of sales, that had an online system, which seems mad, doesn't it? But it was very much offline. And we naively thought we'd build our own software company, write software and build our own warehouse system. But to do that, you needed to kind of show it worked. So we set up a miniature warehouse just to do the honey company's fulfillment as a first customer to kind of prove the platform. It turned out very hard to sell the software, but very easy to sell the fulfillment service. And then we grew from 2 people in a small shed to sort of 200 people in a very large shed, in multiple sheds, actually one in the UK, one in the US, now one in Europe, looking at Australia. And now only now.
That's crazy. That's huge.
Yeah, and only now after 12 years going back to selling software, actually now looking at licensing the platform back out as we originally intended.
Wow. And so 200 people, like what were they mostly doing? Are these mostly software engineers, or are there people developing the platform, or what?
So it's over 200 people now. There are, I think, about 20 software engineers, then probably another 50, 60 people, sort of office staff, so management, leadership team, customer service, support staff, and then the remaining sort of 150 plus are actually picking, packing. So actually part of the fulfillment team, picking, packing the orders.
And are you still a shareholder? I know you had a big, I understand it. I inferred it's big, but I don't know whether it was public. You had a private equity investment or a VC investment?
Yeah, we did. We did have a private equity investment. I am still a major shareholder, not majority anymore, but still a major shareholder in the business.
And do you still work there, or you said you were looking back at software, or have you sort of put that chapter of your life? Obviously, if you're still a major shareholder, then you still highly incentivized to make sure things carry on going well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I still have a board seat in the top holding company. We hired a CEO, so we hired a new CEO about 2 years ago, and since then my role has kind of gradually progressed to where it's now looking at sort of product. Where does the product need to go and what do we do? So I do that 1 day a week, and then looking at other opportunities and potentially other kind of scale up non-exec roles the rest of the time.
And just in terms of, I don't know what you can share. Can you give it sort of like headline numbers, like, and you've given the number of employees, but like revenue or what the valuation was when you took in the investment? If you can't share it, don't. But if you can just
yes, I mean some of this is public. So I think the valuation when LDC invested was around 20 million, give or take. And turnover now is probably 2.5 times that. So we're now about 50 million turnover this year.
in GB pounds?
Yeah, 50 million
Okay.
pounds.
Yeah, the UK is a country to the north of France. For any of our listeners who don't know that,
we do have a couple of sites in the US, one in Ohio, one in Las Vegas, if that makes it closer to home.
Okay. Most of our listeners are in the US, but
I'm like you. I'm fascinating in unpacking this story because I love it. First of all, I love the 2 to 200 to basically from nothing, bootstrapped with an idea. So you got to tell us a little bit more about how you did that. And how, a little bit about the journey. I mean, so you gave the intro, but then you basically said, yeah, you guys set it up. This was your idea. You set up, we'll do the software around our own thing. And then it turned into a 200-person company. So there's a space in between. I would love to get some more color on like, how did you, so basically it was the two of you to begin with.
Yeah. So
and then like, how long did it take to get like the first employee, and who was the first person you hired, and why did you hire that person? And then like slowly.
Yeah, so we started off, we had to build an office because we rented part of a warehouse that didn't have any space. So we had to build ourselves a plasterboard kind of shed in the corner to make that work. And there's lots of stories around like the internet not working. We're having to borrow Wi-Fi off someone.
Sorry, what year is this? This is what year? Did you give us
2010.
Okay, 2010, okay.
Yeah, so we had BT dial-up internet, which was just terrible. So we were borrowing Virgin Media Wi-Fi. We were borrowing it off a lady, our first employee. So we'll go back a bit. So we started, we'd work for the honey company in the morning. So I'd still do my office admin job, answering the phone, processing orders and everything else for another company. And James Strachan, who's the other co-founder, he would do some software development on their website in the mornings. And then the afternoon, we'd pick and pack the orders at lunchtime, put them in the post. And then I'd spend the afternoon cold calling, and then James would spend the afternoon actually coding the platform and building the software.
So first of all, I love this. Just to make it clear, if people didn't understand, you were actually doing basically the two of you did all the jobs. Like basically you split all the jobs that could possibly be done, including the manual labor of packing and sending it to the post and all that. Yeah,
we've got some good pictures. We've got some good pictures of James's car completely bursting with post, where it's just in the passenger seat, in the back seats, in the boot.
And was there, I gotta ask.
By the way, we have a newsletter. If you can send us any nice entertaining photos, we might put them because it's basically to drive downloads. But we have a Substack newsletter we send out, and I think a few nice pictures would add color to our comments on this stuff.
Some funny pictures across. So we started doing that, and then we decided to hire someone, and it was a resident that lived in the street opposite, and they worked like 3 or 4 hours a day just packing for us, so we didn't have to spend quite so long picking the orders at lunchtime.
The low-hanging fruit.
And they luckily lived so close that when we had so many issues with internet, we paid for them to have Virgin fiber to their house, and then we put a long-range Wi-Fi on the back of their bedroom and one on the side of the building, so we could sort of beam it across the car park, which was equally unreliable, but it gave you two unreliable.
But it gave you a sense, exactly. It gave you a sense of something. I have to ask, because I a little bit earlier than you, I also was doing a business that that was very similar. I had to go to the post office a lot. I was packing things and sending them all over the world. But back then, I'm talking, what about when you got to the post office? Like the efficiency there. I mean, like I had I think I got a franking machine at one point so that I could like automatically stamp the stuff. But if you're doing a lot of it, like were they set up for handling you?
So we quickly got to the point where we'd integrate with Royal Mail. So all the files and everything would get sent to Royal Mail electronically beforehand. So all you had to do was drop the post off. But the local post office did get, if it was more than 3 or 4 bags, they would look at you a bit like, are you really going to leave all that in this tiny shop? But the Royal Mail have a policy where they won't collect from you unless you've got a minimum spend. And it's like, well, the minimum spend isn't based on your run rate. Your minimum spend is based on what you did in the last 12 months. So it's like, well, I'm not paying for the collection. They can have, so we were kind of a lot of arguing going on with the corner shop about how much post they had to have before someone eventually
did you have to dig it up and go to the
next? We'll give you a collection.
And actually, for any entrepreneurs listening, if you do something and by a miracle it starts going really well really early, it's very funny where the sort of people who deal with small customers get really annoyed with you. You're becoming too big for them because you're not big enough yet to get on the sort of corporate handling corridor.
Yeah, you can't keep leaving that post
Or
here.
I
That
had
you're not
a-
going to give you a collection.
I just had tell
a
I tell a story when I was 8 years old and I was selling lollipops and bubble gum in my prep school in Oxford. I didn't know about warehouses back then, unfortunately, cash and carriers back then, unfortunately, that no one had told me they existed. So my sister, I wanted to buy 150 lollipops at the school, the shop near her school, because they had better prices than the one near my school. And they got really angry with her because of the people who worked behind the counter didn't own it, and they just got annoyed with someone trying to buy 150 lollipops because it was too big an order to handle, which is a bit of a diversion. Did you raise?
Well, no, I have to add my diversion story too, because it's just too appropriate for this. So like I had the ladies in the Polish post office do me a favor. So I was like, had a newsletter, like an international newsletter, and I was trying to send it out to the US. I was trying to sell it. I was sending out like copies to the US, and a newsletter has some level of like the timeliness of it is kind of important. And so I had sent this, like, I don't know, 200 newsletters out, expensive. I wanted to do, airmail to all the US. And I come back and they're sent, and I'm like, but why is it so much cheaper? And she's like, oh no, I did you a favor. You didn't want to send all those airmail. I sent them by sea. It's much cheaper. So she basically saved me, like, but it completely didn't understand the idea of like, I'm trying to get this there fast for business, basically. And so, but anyway, like, I just think that there's the small shop thing that's another side of the small shop. But anyway, that's an entrepreneur. That's what happens when, as Richard said, when you end up with a lot of stuff and small, and you have to deal with like the small counter person who's not used to having so much. Anyway, that's hilarious. Sorry, take it from there, basically.
So we got to the point where we eventually gave up the kind of the jobs at the health food company selling the honey to work full time in the business. We hired another employee that worked full time to help sort of picking, packing in, and through all the sales.
Can I jump in and just talk about your first customer? Because obviously you started with your honey company customer, who in a way, and it counts, but it doesn't count because it wasn't a typical sales process at all. But was it like a first customer or the customer that made you both realize this actually may really work? Because quite often at the beginning, to begin with, you wonder if you're crazy, and then there's that moment where you begin to feel this might work. At least, can you talk us through that?
Well, we were originally trying to sell the platform, so we were trying to sell the software platform for people to use themselves, because we were, how this is working. And I guess we quickly realized that lots of inquiries either didn't want to pay for the software because they wanted it for free or very cheap, or they wanted the software, but they also wanted all this custom other work done to it, which we didn't want to support because we wanted to build, a cloud-based platform that wasn't completely bespoke for every client. But we had quite a few people saying, I really like the idea, but can you just do it for me? And I think one of the problems and benefits of bootstrapping is you are forced, in those early days, you are forced to take the journey of least resistance. And so you're kind of forced to go, fine, then look, we'll just do it for you because it's another point that proves the platform works. It's better to it's easier to sell the software if you've got more customers using it than it is if you've only got one. So we had a company doing homebrew equipment, tins of homebrew, corks, bungs, demijohns, all those kind of equipment. And they were based in South London, looking to kind of semi-retire. And this was their way out of doing it themselves, so they could outsource everything to us and just manage the online shop from home. And that was our biggest customer by a long way. Our fifth customer but they were by far, more orders than anybody else was shipping out by a long way. And that was the beginning of the end of us not really bothering to sell the software anymore and just finding more and more people that wanted fulfillment, because we were making, not lots of cash, but margin-wise, we were making quite good profit. It was scaling well. And I don't think we really had a plan. The plan was to make some money and sell something, and this was selling. It was quite easy to sell.
So when you hear a startup guru saying you've got to start with a mission and vision, your mission and vision was make some money and sell something.
I've always found it strange. I've never done, although we had an investment, I've never run or been involved with a business that's had, a huge amount of startup cash. But I could see how easy it would be if you've got an idea and a load of cash to pursue an idea without any regard for how many people actually want to buy it. Because you believe in the idea. And actually, when you're forced to have to sell something, you're really forced to listen to what people want to buy.
Totally. And did you have angel investors? Because I think the reason I knew about you was through Peter Cowley, which suggested to me, was he a friend or one of a group of angel investors?
Well, so Peter was an angel investor, although I think he invested £3,000, which was a token gesture. It was a token gesture investment so that he could actually buy some shares, through it being a financial transaction. So I think I think he got 100x return or something silly. It was over 100x return on that, and I think that's because he bought in at a fairly good price at the time. So Peter came on really as a non-exec chair and an advisor to the company to help us grow. So we didn't have a portfolio of angels. There wasn't like a cash lump sum. But he was very good at knowing contacts and knowing the foibles of growing and scaling a business.
So I'm just to make sure we understand that. At what stage did you think you needed it? It's because £3,000 even at the beginning isn't that much money in Britain in 2012 or whenever it was.
No, I think our turnover was about £200,000 or £300,000 when he invested. So yeah, I mean £3,000 was not meaningful in any way really to the company. But I had done a pitch to the Cambridge Angels, and the pitch was, we don't want any money. We're not looking for investment, but what we do want is some experienced people to help us grow the company. We were profitable pretty much from day one, bearing in mind we only worked full time from the point we had enough customers to support a basic sort of minimum wage salary. So we didn't feel like we needed investment, and the company was growing at 200 or 300% per annum anyway. Looking back, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Would investment would have probably grown us quicker and possibly professionalized the business faster. I don't know if we had the experience to manage much more growth than that, and I don't know whether dilution would have been worth it.
No. Well,
I want to touch on two things that maybe first you mentioned something that I think is really important for startup people and entrepreneurs that start something now. I fall into the camp such as yourself without having the full plan. Basically, I was just try to do the next thing that made sense and that would make the business more valuable and more money. But what spoke to me is that I heard you say that basically you'd follow. Basically, what I understood is basically you were going to do whatever the clients wanted. So if the clients needed this, you're going to do it. If the clients needed that, you're going to do it. And then finally, at some point, you realize, hey, hold on a second. This idea of the software, it's better to actually basically have a service. I guess you decided to have a service business, which software is a service as well. But whatever. Let's say it's a service business instead. And like that's one really key moment is focus. So then did you just at which point was this the point when you had that client, or was there some point that you said, okay, hold on a second, let's focus, because it's great to get the money and to grow, but then I think it's equally important to start to focus on, because otherwise you're never going to be great at anything, right? So did that happen or?
I think that customer was probably the point at which, like, you know what, let's just grow the service company. We'll worry about the software side later. Like, we'll come back to that. I don't think it's probably, I probably not explained well that we weren't like doing anything the customer wanted. We had lots of customers said, oh, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And we would say, no, we're not doing that. We don't want to do that. And that was from a really principle point of view, that, whether it was them using the software or us using the software didn't matter. But what mattered is we had some really strong principles about how the software would work, that it would be multi-tenant, that it would be every customer gets the same features, that we build features that were for the collective benefit of all users. We weren't going to go build something really specialist and niche to only one user, because that didn't scale. So there was quite a lot of kind of criteria put around how the software would be built. And I guess we went, probably at that fifth customer saying, you know what, let's just grow a service business. Because once you've got a really big service business, well, that really proves the software works, then it will be easier to sell the software. And so I guess it was always delaying that, and then it will be easier to sell the software. Kind of happened. Yeah, I mean, that was delayed for like a decade, because provided the company kept growing every year, it always never seemed necessary.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable, and I think particularly for people listening, it's a question of like keeping that sort of antenna on, that you can be very focused on the thing you want to do, but suddenly if you get like treble your annual revenue your annual revenue might only be £15,000 or £20,000 forecast, but if suddenly someone shows up, obviously a £50,000 contract as a single person, you think, wow, well, how many more of them are there? And if there are a lot of them out there, the opportunity is kind of obvious, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm working with another company at the moment, and they've got a product where they've got a solution, should I say, and there's 3 or 4 different service products that it could be, and they still keep flipping depending on like which customer came on last month, because they'll get a big customer on one side and go, oh yeah, we'll go and do this, and then there's another customer becomes a bit annoying, and then someone else pops up wanting a different service with the same product, and they're paying more money and it seems easier to service. And so I think that product market fit is an evolution. It does take quite a long time to really understand where's the biggest market.
Mm. And I mean,
right. And what's your strengths? And part of it is like, what are your strengths? I mean, like, what are your strengths exactly? And what do they suit best? Because you may identify a market you're not able to fulfill as better as something else. You're whatever better suited to, and I'm not sure to what extent your software, but I'm sure you could have developed your software in lots of different ways. And there was a lot of pressure on you. I'm sure all the clients are like, I want this, I want that,
Yeah.
whatever. And then sometimes you had to say yes, and sometimes you had to say no, basically.
I think Kimon, having a set of principles that you apply is the best way of dealing with that. So there's not a rule book of what you will or won't say yes to, but there's a principle that says, this is the principle.
Is it within my principles? Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And in terms of your sort of competitive advantage, I was very struck because I visited you pretty in the early days, and you already had quite an impressive warehouse, but I can't, it must have been sort of 2013, 14, I suppose. I can't remember exactly, but I'm just because you're already at some scale when I visited you. And at that stage, I was very struck by the efficiencies. You're really, really focused on, minimizing manual work and making things as efficient as possible. And so to some extent, you were capturing the benefits of your own automation, and compared to perhaps other people doing the same thing who weren't as efficient. Quite often with the software company, the customer gets all the benefits of the automation, and you have more and more expensive software if you don't have enough competition. And did you sort of have a sense that your operations were more efficient than competitors? And obviously the big monster in this marketplace would be fulfilled by Amazon. So can you just talk a bit about the reasons why you think people came to you? Because it's not that you had no competition.
So fulfilled by Amazon is a non-competing product in a way, although it on the face of it does the same thing. Fulfillment by Amazon is very well priced. I mean, it's incredibly well priced. But it's only very well priced if you sell on Amazon. And back then, if you sold on Amazon, you would get I think it was a Laithwaite's wine voucher in pretty much every box, and you'd get Amazon on the side of the box, and it'd be very much sold by Amazon. And still to this very day, the retailer doesn't even get to know the email address or the phone number of the customer. They just get an Amazon account ID that is who they're emailing. So for a lot of the brands we were working for and still work for today, they're direct to consumer. They're very much about their interaction with their consumer brand. So some of them do sell on Amazon, sometimes for a bit of customer acquisition, but most of them sell on their own store, and they want the product to be sent out very much from them, and they want to have that relationship with the customer. And so in a way, although I think Amazon's fulfillment is an alternative for Amazon sellers to us, but what we were offering was a very different solution to what Amazon offer, as far as the practicality of it. And there was competition, 2010, there were other fulfillment companies. But I think it's true, when we started, we were still the first pure cloud-based fulfillment platform that existed.
Okay. So in fact, maybe there was less competition than I imagined. I was aware of a company called Shipwire, I think, was one that I don't know. But so basically,
Shipwire were very big in the US, and the UK offering at the time, I don't know how much it's improved. I've still not heard great things, but at the time there was a warehouse in Scotland that they used through a partner scheme, but it was very much a partner on a very long way away. So the customer support, as far as the UK offering, I think we were the only one in the UK offering something comparable.
So you had first mover advantage in a rapidly growing e-commerce space. So
yeah, and we probably had that advantage for the first 4 or 5 years.
And would you say that, did you have a sense that this was a sort of, you'd stumbled into a lucky opportunity? Were you sort of aware of the fact you knew that sooner or later other people were going to wake up, and it wasn't always going to be as fat margins as it was when you got a growing
No, I think
market?
we knew other companies would wake up. I mean, the industry is notoriously quite slow to innovate. And it probably took, at least 5 years, if not 7 years, for people to really, start offering something very comparable from a software side. I think that's one of the questions then, like, should we have taken investment earlier on to grow and scale? Because the first 2 or 3 years are very much around finding your feet and understanding the problem and understanding, we started off quite naively thinking it'd be really quick and easy to build a software platform to do this, and hadn't thought through just how complicated. You think you pick an item from the shelf, you put it in a box and you post it. It sounds so simple. When you start doing tens of thousands of parcels a day, and there's so many complexities, like even charging for storages, we had buckets that stacked, and people then wanted to pay. How do you account for the fact we charge storage by the cubic foot or the cubic meter? Well, you put buckets inside each other, they kind of stack. So it's like you have to put now a variable in for stack ratio for certain products, and if they're in the same location, then you have to create the stack ratio to create it. And it's like there's so many of these little edge cases that you have to build in that I think the product became a lot bigger than we thought. And so, yeah, would investment have got us more first mover advantage for kind of a longer growth period? I don't know. One of the things that has, and testament to James Strachan in it, and amazed me, is I see so many companies now that are kind of pure SaaS companies, and the product is very simple. You look at some of the parking apps, and you've got to take registration plate, time of parking and the car park number, and that's kind of the app. And then I look at fulfillment. We've got an order management platform, a carrier management platform, like there's a warehouse management platform, all the inventory controls, all the integrations, all the different shopping carts. The size of the platform is just vast. And you feel like we're really hard done by because we chose, to build a hugely extensive platform with a very, very small team. It's like, if only we built some kind of SaaS platform that only had like 3 input fields, it'd be so simple.
So it's more complex than perhaps many other similar seeming products. And can you talk a bit about the person? I mean, you look reasonably relaxed and happy, but were there sort of moments along the journey where you were sort of ripping your hair out that were much, so you're obviously pretty much would be described as a success story. You built a startup, it was profitable, you took some cash out when you had an exit round, you're still a shareholder, still doing well. But, were there moments in the journey which were like impossibly hard and you sort of struggled with, that you could share, like the difficulties? Because it's quite important not to sort of put it as a bed of roses.
I have a lot of respect for people who are older that have a job and quit their job to start a company. Where they've got a mortgage and they've got outgoings. And when we started the company, we were pretty much straight out of university, used to living in student halls that were pretty rough, and not used to having any cash. So, it was very stressful. It was all the things you mentioned about, most days were, and my younger self probably a lot less good at hiding the stress. I'd probably let out a fist of rage every now and again at just how terrible the world could be that these things go wrong. But actually, because we didn't need the cash, I think we probably enjoyed the journey quite a lot. So, there were moments when we ran out of office space and we had the gents and the ladies' loos converted into offices by putting tables over the toilets and things, because like that was just a solution. And it's kind of fun at the time. You don't really think about it. You couldn't do that. I think now, I think it would be quite difficult. And so I guess, yeah, it was a very stressful time, but I think the stress was I think we thrived on the stress and the challenge of doing it. I think to do that later in life, I don't know if you actually had genuine commitments to have to pay, whether that stress would be as enjoyable.
And
that's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, was there a time when the culture changed? Obviously, one of the advantages of a bootstrapping culture is the sort of lean and meanness, that everyone who works in the organization realizes that it's not, there isn't some nice, generous or a seemingly generous fund who's put lots of money in. So you don't start with the pot plants and the muzak and everything. Yeah. But was there a time as the company started becoming more successful where that it was harder to keep that culture in place, or did you manage to sort of keep the lid on?
I think when we took external investment, it hasn't changed the culture completely, but it has changed the culture slightly. I think the risk profile of investors is very different, especially private equity investors is very different. For a long time, our cybersecurity policy was, if no one knows if only our clients know the URL to log on, as long as you've got the basics covered, it's very unlikely you're going to get hacked, because if no one can find it and no one knows where you are and you're a very small company, then kind of doesn't matter that much. You've got backups for everything. The worst that happens is you have to resurrect everything from backups, which you test. So there's a level of planning to make sure it's protected, but it's also, we didn't really spend any money on security. We did the stuff you needed to do at the minimum, and then we didn't spend any more. And then now we go through, quarterly pen tests, and we have external people come in and audit it, and we pay for all these different software packages and everything else to protect it, because it's a bigger risk, I guess, financially, and it's seen as something that institutional investors can't. If they were to screw up and we got hacked and something bad happened, it would seem very embarrassing for them to have not done the basic, the due diligence of, well, we'll just pay all this money to all these consultants. But I think as a bootstrapping company, that the idea of paying a load of consultants to come and check up on stuff like that seems very counterintuitive.
And
So,
Kimon, you go ahead. I've been asking too many questions.
yeah, I mean, you've just been rattling off like 5 in a row now. So just trying to get a word in here, Mr. Lucas. You've been alluding multiple times, James, to, well, actually, initially you were alluding to actually talking to the Cambridge Angels, but not to get money, to get, I think, great hair experience or whatever, like more senior experience in how to develop your business. And I guess I'm wondering, because your story is actually very similar. It feels very similar to mine in a lot of ways. And basically, as a young, I also was a young entrepreneur without doing anything. Like, sounds similar. Like, I didn't have a lot of work experience, and I just went and I was figuring it out as I went along. And at some point, it got to the point where I was like, well, yeah, that's great. I got this thing started, but I would like to get some people that really know how to do, like senior people with experience. And that's what it sounded like you were talking about with the Cambridge Angels.
Yeah.
Did you end up, and sorry, you also mentioned a little bit about paying consultants. I actually started paying consultants exactly for that, to get some other senior whatever experience opinions about various different aspects of the business. Did you ever tackle that, or did you just go it alone the whole way, or how did you?
No. So we did. I wasn't. I think it was more. My point on the kind of consulting thing was more around when you get, PwC in to audit your finances. And it's
okay, right. Okay,
does that really add any value, or is it just
the useless consultants? Yeah, exactly.
I think that's no, I mean, we had so for sales, we got someone in to help coach us on how to sell. We eventually hired that person part-time, as a part-time salesperson, because we realized we didn't know, we knew how to sell, we could sell, but we realized there's people out there that know more than us. I think Peter coming in was that question. We didn't know how to run a company. We deduced how to run a company by being engineers and looking at the principles of well, how must this work? We have to pay these people, they do this, and this that kind of makes sense, we'll do it this way. But I think we were aware at an early stage that we didn't have all of the answers for how to run a business. There were lots of things in there that we knew as we scaled, we'd have, HR, just, legislation and things like that we'd have to address, and knowing when's the appropriate time to address it. And I think that's really important for small companies, because it's very easy. I've seen other companies growing where, you do need to put in board structure. Peter helped us put in a board structure, minutes and everything else in there. Sorry, it's the dog just pushing his way into the room behind me. But Peter helped put board structure and things in that made us more professionalized as a company that we probably wouldn't have done. But likewise, if we'd done it too early, we would have spent all that time building all the bureaucracy and not building the product. And I think knowing when is that level of bureaucracy suitable is an important question to learn.
I think that's very, very wise, and I think certainly a mistake I made was not to bring in sort of go to people. And I think what you did of going to the investor group and saying, we don't really need your money, but we need your grey hair, so we'll sell you a little bit of equity if you come and help us, is a very smart move. But the time to do that is when you already know it's working, because then you can get a decent valuation, because the grey hair is not going to want to put in too much time. And even if it's so this sort of £3,000 deal to give Peter 100x is quite but that's probably paid for itself many times over by not making catastrophic mistakes in, I don't know, your senior executive compensation system or whatever down the line, or something like that, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it was. I think Peter definitely added the value that he took out.
Mm. And changing tack a bit, you and the other James were Cambridge University graduates who were, at the time when your colleagues might have been working for, PA Technology in Melbourne, or, Goldman Sachs in London, you were labeling up honey and stuff like that. Was where, in terms of your family or the expectations you had of yourself or other people had of you, was the route you chose a bit surprising, either to yourself or to others? And how did you deal with that if some people disapproved and said, why don't you get a proper job, James? Someone must have thought that or said that.
We didn't get a lot of that. I met my wife while I was working, and I never really thought much of it. But looking back at it, talking to her, I guess the fact I was still living in like a bedroom that was smaller than a cupboard, in some kind of rented house, when friends of mine were earning, six-figure salaries in London, it probably was a bit strange. It was never questioned at the time. Like, no one's ever really questioned it. And I think, having worked, I've done some work experience in a couple of companies. Having left uni, never really felt the desire to work in an office, doing long hours. I don't know what it was about it, but it wasn't appealing. I think I enjoyed the kind of creating and making and solving problems, and there's less of that. There was a couple of jobs that I was looking at that were kind of like manufacturing, process engineering. So you'd go into a company, look at a production system, and then try and work out how you can make it more efficient, or work out how to make it run faster, as kind of consultancy. But I think it looked exciting on the face of it, but you could tell that it was going to become one of those trudger for jobs after 6-12 months.
So in other words, and that's an important insight. So basically, for people listening, it may not be for everyone, but simply not caring what other people, if it appealed to you, good. If it didn't appeal to you, you're not going to do it. It's quite a sort of entrepreneurial mindset. You weren't driven by the desire to impress other people. You just wanted to have you wanted an interesting life.
Yeah, and we didn't start the company. Again, we had a business plan. Of course we did. We'd written down some financials and made sure it worked, but we didn't have a plan to create a company with an X million pound exit. It wasn't like, right, we're going to get rich, we're going to go and do this, we're going to build this company. It was, here's a problem that needs solving. Let's build something cool that's going to solve this problem, and let's try and scale it to make as much money as we can. But the money almost was just a measure of how well you were solving the problem. It wasn't, it wasn't like we were doing it because we had a certain monetary target involved. And there's different people do different things, aren't there?
Yeah, and flipping it back earlier about, and so basically I sort of picked up how your attitude, but in terms of family, were they surprised that you set up a business? And when you were a teenager, did you ever, and before you went to university, when you were a kid, did you have that feeling that you might end up doing your own thing, or was it just a sort of bit of a random walk?
I think it's just a bit of a random walk. I mean, before uni, I was always interested in like making things, but like physically making, like engineering, kind of building, designing, kind of machines and things like that. And I always thought I was going to product design, not software product design, but like physical product design. That was what I was interested in. So yeah, it was kind of just a chance, I guess, that it happened.
Interesting. Kimon, what do you think? What have you got to interrogate more on this?
No, I'm curious. I mean, so basically you got here, and so at which point did you really seriously start to think about the private equity and actually making the next? Because that's a huge decision, right? I mean, like, you built your business up, and you're still very young. So like, what drove you? Like, what was the impetus there? Obviously, you wanted a new challenge?
I think Peter asked the question and said, what do you want to sell? And I think we both looked at it and thought, well, we're not going to sell. We really enjoy working in the company. Why would we ever sell any of the company? Why would we take investment? Right. It's kind of, we enjoy what we do. We just keep doing it. And then Peter kind of said, well, there will be a point at which it makes sense to take some cash out, and to, how much cash do you want to live? And, what would you need to take out if you wanted to, have a different, like, do other things? And I think our both, James and myself's reaction to that was very much like, we don't really want to, we'll just keep doing this, it's fun. And it probably took well over a year of having that conversation backwards and forwards to actually go, yeah, you know what, there probably is a point. I think for me, there was a point thinking, maybe it would be worth having an investor come in, having some sort of, still want to do this, but maybe it's not forever. I think James Strachan got quite frustrated with, he came in as an engineering role, building solutions and doing coding. And in a small company, in a startup, you can do that and it's really fun. And even the size we were getting to, 100 employees, it was becoming less fun because actually, as senior leaders in a company, most of your time is spent dealing with people. And as I talked the other day, and somebody said, there's two types of problems in companies. There's people problems, and there's problems that you don't know yet are people problems. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. All your time is spent dealing with problems, which
Absolutely.
always people problems. And I think that was quite a distraction for James. And he was very much kind of like, well, why don't we just stop growing the company and we'll just keep it as it is and just kind of enjoy running it day to day. And my view and Peter's view is very much that, well, if you stop growing, it's probably only going to go one way. It's probably only going to, get swallowed up or disappear or stop.
Yeah.
And I think that point, James kind of decided to exit from the company, not entirely, but a bit further to take kind of part-time non-exec role. That's the point. Then we took some private equity on to help kind of grow the next journey. And then I think I've kind of done the same thing. My threshold is probably a bit higher for how much do I want to be dealing with people problems. So I was probably a couple of years behind James, but I think we've both come to the same outcome.
But you've gotten there now. So, because as you said, I think at the beginning you said you're doing a day a week. Is that right?
Yeah,
a day a week.
Yeah.
So then, what are you, or like, what do you want to do? You're so young, and you got all this talent, and I guess some funds to invest. What's the next? What do you want to do?
For me, I've looked at what do I do? Yeah, what do you want to do? What kind of interests me? I think what interests me most is taking that company that's like 5 or 20 people, and how do you scale it to that 50 to 100 mark? Because for me, that's the most interesting bit. When you've got product market fit, and it's how do you commercialize the product? How do you optimize and build a sales process? How do you optimize and build the support process in the background? How do you market the product? How do you bring out the proposition in a way that really makes a difference and brand it, and the kind of internal culture? How do you build all those things? They were the most, the first couple of years of a startup, a hard graft with not a lot to show for it other than you've got a product that now works and it didn't before. But I think for me, the bit that's really rewarding is taking a product that's kind of MVP and then scaling it into something that's a lot bigger.
Is that your dog scratching itself?
Yeah, it's molting season at the moment, and everything's covered in fur.
Yeah, we're a dog friendly podcast, so
Yeah.
don't worry about that. And in terms of your sort of personal business model, do you? How do you decide which ones you get involved in? Obviously, if you come on a podcast like this, someone might write to you, but do you want to put your seriously? I mean, it may happen, but do you go out looking, or do people come to you?
Well, it's only the last 2 months I've been doing a day a week. So it's very early days. I've got one company I've been working with.
Then you don't want I don't want to get on the list of people like your wife and a mother asking the same question. What are you going to do now?
yeah, that has been asked.
I didn't realize it was so fresh. I sort of imagined that it was longer, that you were doing it for
No, it's not been too long. So I've been doing some mentoring of local businesses for a couple of years now, on and off, some pro bono, just to help other companies. The things for me, I think that it's been good. We always said when we started the company, we had a couple of rules that we didn't want to work with anything that was perishable, because we just realized that perishable goods is just a nightmare. We didn't really want to deal with the public, because dealing with the public is generally a nightmare. So we kind of wanted to do business to business services, and preferably recurring revenue services. So that's, everything the company's done has been that model. And I think for me, business to business marketing and recurring revenue are still things that I feel like is a really strong area of business. It's not to say I wouldn't look at consumer facing or wouldn't look at non-recurring services. But I think that I definitely have a slant towards that kind of technology enabled or SaaS based recurring revenue services.
But coming back to your personal business model, do you envisage like getting a sort of bit like Peter, getting involved in the sense of putting some money in as well as your know-how and advice, or
Yeah,
could you just
I think so.
Because you probably don't need to be a consultant at X £100 an hour or whatever, even if it's good for your ego.
No, and that's true. Although, Peter had a very big portfolio, more companies, but far more companies than he could actually, have much dealings with on a day-to-day basis, because it was all part of the network, the angel network he was in. I think for me, what's interesting is more, working with that company. And I definitely think there's a good line which a non-exec brings, which is you get to work on really exciting, challenging problems with great people, and then you get to go home at night and you get to sleep. Because you don't take the problems home, you just solve them while you're there. And I think that's a very privileged place to be in life, but definitely one I think my wife would be grateful for after years of being at the coalface. So I think investing in companies is something I'd do, but I'd also want to be involved enough that you were doing a day a month at least, maybe more.
Yeah, that's actually that was actually my question exactly, because you strike me as the kind of person that's a doer rather than like, I don't know how, like, okay, like I personally am not really interested in having a big portfolio of companies. Like that's just not it, like I'm not, it's no criticism against anybody that has that or does that. It's just a less interesting activity for me. I'd rather be involved in fewer and actually doing stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Getting my hands dirty. Yeah.
Having
And do
4 or
you
5 companies
but you're thinking like
each
one day a month, like of getting your hand, like, or one day a month, you're saying, of getting your hands dirty kind of thing? Or
whether it's a day a week, a day a month, I think, it varies depending on the stage of that company. But I think it would definitely a portfolio of 4 or 5 that you're properly invested in and actually working with the companies to grow them.
Yeah.
If you wanted a portfolio of 100 investment companies, that's great, but you could just pay someone to manage that. There's
exactly.
a fund, go and invest in some stuff.
And how do you cope with the free time that you've gone from being probably working more than normal? I would imagine that you've more, not just your sort of working hours, but what you think about when you're not working. It's like when you've got you're leading your own startup, you're responsible for so many things, and you're to yourself and the customers and employees and everything. But when you've got potentially, you could like put your feet up for a day or two and the world wouldn't end. What are you good at not doing anything? Do you have things that you've been postponing? Once I get out of this, at last I can read or walk or play golf or just
lots of ideas that never happen because there's always too many other things I find to do. I'm my own worst enemy in making my own stress by finding things to do that probably didn't need doing. So I've had no issue with that. It's been interesting working hours actually, because when in the startup phase, we were probably doing 100 hours a week. I'd only just met my wife then, so I'd spend most evenings at home working till 10, 11 o'clock at night. We'd spend weekends working, had nothing better to do, and you didn't really notice the hours. It was kind of enjoyable, and then kind of the hours have come down, I guess, as the company got bigger and you had more people to deal with as other things and relationships and home life. So it's kind of been a very gradual decline, probably in the last 5 years, to kind of vaguely normal working hours a week. We bought a big house in the country, which has been a lot more work than expected. So currently that has been taking up a lot of time in managing and repairing and doing all the other projects that we want to do here. And there's always projects to do. So there's always time sink if you want to find some time. I've not been short of stuff to do, I don't think. And that will be for a while.
Okay, but you haven't had a sort of you haven't had something once I get out of James and James, at last I can devote my time to X or Y. You sort of create things without a big master plan, basically.
I create things. I'm quite. I'll look at something outside and think, oh, wouldn't it be great if you could build a pergola there, and then go and buy a pergola, and then not want to bother to put it up because in my head it's done. I've had the problem. I've solved the problem by buying this thing to go in the space, and now I just have to get it finished. And then you'll buy, then I'll go and find another problem or another project. Oh, wouldn't it be great if we could do this and do something over there? And so I think there's always unfinished projects for me to keep finishing. I probably start projects at a greater rate than I finish them.
So maybe for people listening who get to your lucky situation, buying a massive house in the country isn't, if you're focusing on external productivity. I mean, you do what you do it for you, right? You do what you want. So who cares whether it sort of?
I care sometimes, because you can actually you can if you have too many projects, create quite a lot of stress for yourself. And actually, I think I found the last couple of years probably more stressful than running a company at times, just because there's always a feeling like there's more to be done than there's hours in the day.
So we're coming to the end of our allotted time, which is, and it's been extremely interesting. Just a couple more questions, really. And if you think of the journey you've had and the lessons you've learned, is there anything that really surprised you that perhaps you think not that many entrepreneurs realize at the beginning of their journey? There's sort of things you particularly underline that, just remember these one or two things because it's going to be different.
Only because I heard it earlier this week, but it is running a business is more about leadership and managing people than it is about any kind of business decision. And while business strategy, business acumen plays a large part in it, actually there's some very successful entrepreneurs who are probably terrible at business, but they know how to hire a great team and they know how to motivate a great team. And actually people management, the bigger the company gets, certainly when you get past 50 people, like people management is the biggest part. And so part of the journey from when we started being an engineer with not particularly good people skills has really been about like the time it takes to coach yourself or be coached in changing how you approach problems, because you do as a founder from a startup into a scale up, you have to really approach the doing it yourself to telling someone else how to do it, building the process and telling them to follow it, to then hiring someone to then build the process for you, and to then saying, actually, this is what we need to achieve, you go and work out what we need to do. And I think that level of removal of yourself can be very hard, especially if people are good at doing.
Sounds like a very good
I'm chuckling
message.
because you've perfectly described, I feel like you've perfectly described me, because I am not good at doing. I'm literally not good at doing. I felt like that I wasn't good at doing, but any success that I've had is a result of actually finding really good people and finding really good teams who can actually do it. And I think you hit actually the nail on the head. Actually, and to be quite honest, that actually made it easier for me to remove myself, because I didn't feel like I was particularly I was.
Yeah, I'm at the other end of the spectrum.
Awesome.
I've always been good at most things I turn my hand to, especially practical things that involve problem solving. So for me, it's always a challenge to find someone that can do it as well as I think it could be. I know how it can be done.
That's the bottleneck. That's the classic. And that's the classic bottleneck, I think, and that's amazing that you got out of it, because that's the classic bottleneck for small businesses. Yeah. Is exactly that thing. Is that it's not going to be done exactly right or exactly the way I think is right. And if you can't start to accept that good enough is good enough, or that there's another way that might be good but not as good.
That's a very frustrating learning curve, I tell you. That's been a very frustrating learning curve.
Yeah, and I think for people listening, that's a great sort of reflection on which to end, that whether you're a Kimon or a James, whether you're not good at doing things, but you're good at getting other people to do things, or you're a James who's really good at doing things and needs to learn how to let go. You just need to know where you are on that spectrum and have that sort of meta looking at yourself and how good you are at that or not good at that, and always try to manage yourself out of being a key part of the organization, because as long as you're a vital part of the organization, you'll never ever be able to move on. You'll be trapped and you'll be, if you make yourself indispensable, you'll never be able to move on, which might be good for your ego, but it's not good for the organization.
I was just going to say, it's just an ego thing. A lot of people can't let go. It's an ego thing. They're too tied up ego-wise into this venture, whatever it is, that they can't, when nobody else can do it, I'm indispensable, whatever, all those things you said. It's exactly the case.
Fantastic. Well, James, thanks very much indeed for your time. I think this is a good valuable note on which to end. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope for our listeners, if they've got any listeners, we'll put some links that James will share with us in the episode description, and to the extent he wants us to. And then if you want to follow up or get back to us at the MBN with any questions or comments, we'd appreciate it. So thank you very much indeed.